The little boy walked into the bank just minutes before closing time, clutching a heavy glass jar filled with coins so tightly that his tiny hands had turned red. His clothes were worn, his sneakers were torn at the edges, and his eyes looked far older than 7 years old. Every employee inside the bank barely noticed him at first, until he dragged the jar onto the manager's desk and with trembling hands emptied hundreds of coins across the polished wood table. Pennies rolled to the floor, nickels spun in circles, quarters scattered everywhere, though. Then the boy looked at the stunned bank manager with tears in his eyes and said something that made the entire room go silent. He said he needed to buy back his house before the police took his mother away forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change lives and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that stay with you forever. 7-year-old Ethan Parker lived in a small town where everyone seemed to know each other's business. His family had once lived a simple but happy life. His father, Daniel, worked as a mechanic and could fix almost anything. His mother, Sarah, worked part-time at a grocery store and spent every spare moment caring for Ethan. They weren't rich, but their tiny yellow house was always full of laughter, homemade dinners, and bedtime stories. Everything changed one rainy night when Daniel was driving home from work after covering an extra shift. A drunk driver ran a red light and crashed into his truck. Daniel died before the ambulance reached the hospital. That night destroyed everything. Sarah became a completely different person after losing her husband. The woman who used to sing while making pancakes now stared blankly at walls for hours. Medical bills from Daniel's emergency treatment began arriving. Funeral costs followed. Then came overdue mortgage payments. Sarah tried to keep everything together. She worked double shifts, skipped meals so Ethan could eat, and sold most of their belongings. But grief had drained her strength. Ethan noticed everything, even when adults thought he was too young to understand. He heard his mother crying late at night when she thought he was asleep. He saw red letters on envelopes marked final notice. He watched strange men in suits leave papers on their front door. One afternoon, Ethan returned home from school and found his mother sitting on the kitchen floor surrounded by unpaid bills. Her hands shook as she held a letter from the bank. Her face looked pale and hopeless. She quickly wiped her tears and forced a smile when she saw him, but Ethan had already read enough words on the paper to understand one terrifying truth: foreclosure. Their house would be taken in 5 days. That same evening, another tragedy struck. Sarah was arrested after collapsing from exhaustion at the grocery store and accidentally driving into a parked police vehicle while trying to rush home to Ethan. The officers discovered her license had expired because she hadn't been able to renew it. Though it was a minor offense, she was detained overnight because of unpaid court fines tied to overdue financial obligations. Spent the night with his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who tried her best to comfort him. But all he could think about was his mother sitting alone in jail and strangers taking their house. The next morning, Ethan overheard Mrs. Thompson speaking on the phone with someone from social services. She whispered that if Sarah couldn't fix her legal and financial problems quickly, Ethan might be placed in temporary foster care. That was the moment fear turned into determination. Ethan ran to his room and pulled a dusty glass jar from beneath his bed. For 3 years, he had been saving every coin he found. Birthday money from relatives, spare change from grocery trips, coins he earned helping neighbors rake leaves. Everything went into that jar. He had originally been saving for a bicycle his father once promised to help him buy. Now, none of that mattered. He poured the coins onto his bed and counted for hours. He didn't fully understand money, but he knew one thing: it was all he had. The next day, while Mrs. Thompson thought he was playing outside, Ethan quietly walked nearly 2 miles to the local bank carrying the jar in his arms. The jar was so heavy he had to stop several times to rest. When he finally entered the bank, people stared. Some smiled sympathetically. Others looked annoyed as he slowly approached the front desk. A young teller told him the bank was closing soon, but Ethan refused to leave. He asked to see the manager because it was an emergency. That was how he ended up standing in front of Richard Lawson, a strict bank manager known for caring more about numbers than people. Richard had spent 20 years building his reputation as someone who followed rules no matter what. At first, he assumed the boy was lost. Then Ethan dumped the jar onto his desk. Coins flew everywhere, and Ethan began crying as he explained everything. He said his dad had died. His mom was in jail. The bank was taking their house. He asked if the coins were enough to stop everything. He begged Richard not to let strangers take the only home where he still felt close to his father. The entire bank fell silent. Employees froze. Customers stopped talking. Even security guards stared in disbelief. Richard looked at the mountain of coins and felt something he hadn't felt in years: shame. Just hours earlier, he had personally approved the final foreclosure paperwork on Sarah Parker's home. To him, it had simply been another file, another overdue account, another signature. But now that file had a face, and that face belonged to a terrified 7-year-old boy trying to save his family with pennies. Richard quietly asked an employee to count the coins. The total came to $214.63. It wasn't even close to what was owed. But something inside Richard broke. He thought about his own daughter, who had died from leukemia years earlier. After her death, he buried himself in work and stopped allowing emotions into business decisions. He convinced himself that feelings made people weak. Yet Ethan reminded him of everything he had lost. That evening, Richard visited Sarah in county jail. He listened to her story. He learned she had never missed a payment until her husband died. He saw how grief had crushed her life. Then Richard did something no one expected. He paid her overdue legal fines anonymously. He hired a lawyer to delay the foreclosure process, and he personally contacted a nonprofit housing foundation that helped widows keep their homes during financial emergencies. But saving the house wasn't easy. The bank board refused to reverse foreclosure proceedings. They argued policies existed for a reason. Richard shocked everyone by threatening to resign publicly and expose how the bank ignored struggling families while executives collected bonuses. His stance created internal chaos. Local media learned about Ethan's coin jar and began reporting the story. Town rallied behind the Parker family. Teachers organized fundraisers. Mechanics honored Daniel by repairing cars for free and donating proceeds. Grocery store workers donated wages. Children from Ethan's school brought piggy banks. Within 3 days, thousands of dollars poured in. But the biggest surprise came when the drunk driver responsible for Daniel's death saw Ethan's story on television. Overwhelmed with guilt, he had recently completed rehabilitation and turned his life around. He sold his business and anonymously donated enough money to fully pay off the Parker family's mortgage. He included a letter expressing endless remorse and asking for forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. Sarah was released from jail and returned home just as volunteers gathered outside her house, repairing broken fences, painting walls, and planting flowers. When she saw Ethan standing on the porch holding his now empty coin jar, she collapsed into tears. She hugged him so tightly it felt like she would never let go. For the first time since Daniel's death, hope returned to their home. Richard became a permanent part of their lives. He helped create a community emergency fund for struggling families and transform the way his bank handled hardship cases. Years later, Ethan stood on a stage as valedictorian of his high school class. In the front row sat his mother and Richard, both crying proudly. Ethan shared the story of the jar of coins that changed his life forever. He said people often think small acts mean nothing, but sometimes a jar of coins can save a family, heal broken hearts, and remind the world that compassion is worth more than money. Before we reach the ending, comment below with one word, hope, if you believe kindness still exists in this world. And if this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to support more stories that inspire compassion and humanity. That old coin jar still sits on Ethan's shelf today, not as a reminder of poverty, but as proof that even the smallest hands can carry enough love to change countless lives forever. Years passed, but the story of the little boy with the jar of coins never faded from the town's memory. People still talked about the day 7-year-old Ethan Parker walked into the bank and unknowingly changed countless lives. Newspapers called it a miracle story. Local television stations replayed the footage of coins spilling across the manager's desk. Strangers mailed letters from across the country. But while the world moved on to the next headline, Ethan and his mother were still learning how to rebuild a life that had once completely fallen apart. Sarah tried her best to move forward. She returned to work, but this time things were different. The grocery store owner, who had seen how hard she had fought to survive, promoted her to store manager. She finally had stable income, health insurance, and enough time to be present for Ethan. Their yellow house slowly felt like home again. The walls that once echoed with grief were now filled with laughter. Family photos returned to shelves. Sarah even began smiling again when she made pancakes on Sunday mornings, just like she used to when Daniel was alive. But healing was never simple. Even though Ethan had become known as the brave little boy who saved his family, inside he still carried deep emotional scars. Loud sirens reminded him of the night his mother was arrested. Every time the mail arrived, his chest tightened with fear. He worried another letter might come and take everything away again. At school, he smiled so people wouldn't worry, but at night he often stared at the ceiling, wondering why his father had to die. As Ethan grew older, he became quiet and deeply compassionate. Whenever he saw classmates being bullied, he stepped in. Whenever teachers asked students to donate to food drives, Ethan always gave the most. He understood pain in a way most children never had to. Richard Lawson, the former bank manager, remained close to Ethan. After exposing his bank's unfair practices, Richard had resigned and started a nonprofit organization called Second Chance Families, helping struggling parents avoid foreclosure and homelessness. What began as one act of kindness became a nationwide movement. Families from different states reached out for help, and Richard dedicated the rest of his life to ensuring no child would ever feel the fear Ethan once felt. When Ethan turned 16, he got his first job after school at a local auto repair shop, the same kind of place where his father once worked. The owner had been one of Daniel's closest friends and treated Ethan like family. Ethan loved fixing engines because it made him feel close to his father. Every time he repaired a broken car, he imagined Daniel smiling proudly. One evening, while closing the garage, Ethan noticed an old man sitting alone outside in his car. The man looked weak and exhausted. Ethan approached and learned the man had been living in his vehicle after losing his home due to medical debt. He was trying to reach his granddaughter in another state, but didn't have enough gas money. That moment brought back painful memories of his own childhood. Ethan remembered what it felt like when the world seemed cold and hopeless. Without hesitation, he gave the man all the money he had saved for months to buy his dream car. It was nearly $2,000. The old man broke down crying. He promised Ethan he would never forget what he had done. Months later, life shocked Ethan again. Sarah collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital. Doctors discovered she had a rare heart condition that required immediate surgery. The operation was expensive, and despite insurance, the out-of-pocket costs were devastating. Ethan felt his childhood nightmare returning. Medical bills began piling up once again. He worked double shifts after school while trying to maintain his grades. He barely slept. Richard helped as much as he could, but the surgery costs were far beyond what anyone expected. Then on the morning, doctors warned that payment deadlines could delay Sarah's treatment. A black luxury SUV pulled into the hospital parking lot. A sharply dressed older man stepped out. Ethan instantly recognized him. It was the same homeless man he had helped outside the garage. The man revealed his true identity. He was William Harper, founder of a billion-dollar transportation company. After losing his wife, he had fallen into depression, walked away from his empire, and spent months anonymously traveling across the country in despair. When Ethan helped him, it restored his faith in humanity. William had quietly searched for Ethan ever since. When he learned about Sarah's condition, he arrived immediately. He paid every single medical bill, not just the surgery, every past debt, every future treatment, everything. But he didn't stop there. William created a scholarship fund in Daniel Parker's name for children who lost parents unexpectedly. He donated millions to Richard's nonprofit. He even rebuilt Ethan's old neighborhood playground where Ethan used to play with his father. Sarah's surgery was successful. When she woke up and learned what happened, Tears streamed down her face as she held Ethan's hand. She told him that kindness always finds its way back to those who give it freely. Years later, Ethan graduated from college as one of the top financial law students in the country. Ironically, the same system that once nearly destroyed his family became the one he chose to fix. He became an attorney dedicated to protecting vulnerable families from unfair banking practices. His first major case made national headlines when he sued a massive financial institution for wrongful foreclosures targeting struggling widows and veterans. He won. Thousands of families kept their homes because of him. At a national awards ceremony honoring humanitarian leaders, Ethan stood on stage once again. In the audience sat Sarah, Richard, and William, all crying with pride. Ethan held up the same old glass jar filled with coins that started everything. The room went silent as he explained that people often underestimate small acts of courage. At 7 years old, he thought he was simply trying to save his mother. He never realized his courage would inspire millions. Before the story ends, comment a kindness wins if this journey moved your heart. Your comment helps spread stories like this to more people who need hope. And if this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories that prove miracles still happen in ordinary lives. That old jar now sits in a museum dedicated to stories of human compassion. Beneath it is a small plaque that reads, "One little boy walked into a bank carrying coins. He walked out carrying the future of countless lives. And every person who reads it leaves believing the world might still be full of miracles after all."